Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira, and I'm once again with the founder and CEO of Silver Bullion, Gregor Gregersen. Gregor, how are you doing?
Doing very well.
I think you folks can see we are in a different arena, a very, very big arena, and it is big news that Gregor wants to share with you. If you could tell us about where we are at.
Yes, so the prior interviews were in our retail store, and today was the first day that we're able to move into our main vault. So this vault has been under construction. We just finished with the epoxy floor, and we now have a short period of time where it's going to be cleaned, and we're going to have the rack installations. We're going to have racks that are about 12 meters high, so that's about 35 to 40 feet high, and we'll be able to stack silver and or metals like indium, germanium, other strategic metals in this facility. And it's going to take us about 4 weeks to install these racks. So right now we've got these 2 days where we said, let's do this interview. Let's show off our vault a little bit because it's been 3 years to get here, and this is a big milestone for us. So I'm glad we can talk a little bit here and finally sit in this place.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things I noticed when you came into the vault, of course, the lighting and the height, the depth of it all. But I noticed this floor that we are on, this brand new shiny floor, and there's a story behind the floor and a purpose behind this floor, if you could share it with us.
Well, I mean, this floor was partially why I couldn't say no to the building. The first time we moved in and we saw this immense room we are sitting in, um, we were running a vault before. So this was our second vault. So once you run a vault, you get to learn the do's and don'ts and the mistakes you've done the first time around and so on. And one of our first mistakes is we rented a place which had an okay floor loading. That was 10 kilonewtons. So to give you an idea, a car park is usually 2 kilonewtons. So we're talking about 5 times stronger than a car park, which isn't bad, but it's not great either. And the more weight you can put on a square meter of space, the more efficiently you can store. So really, gold and silver, very heavy. And it's not the height of your ceiling, but it's how much weight you can put on the floor, which is going to determine how efficiently you can store. So normally when you look at a building, 10 kilonewtons is not bad, 20 kilonewtons is pretty good, 30 kilonewtons is considered excellent. We have 90 kilonewtons. So when I tell people we have 90 kilonewtons in the industry, they think I'm full of it and I'm just talking nonsense, until they realize we really have 90 kilonewtons floor loading. And to give you an idea, that means that our foundations or pillars are going down about 32 meters, that's about 100 feet into the ground to help spread that weight. And that kind of floor loading is 45 times stronger than an average car park, which allows us to stack silver 12 meters high, which in turn gives us an efficiency of storage which will be about 9 times higher than we had in our prior vault. And it means that, in this 20,000 square foot large vault room, we can put as much as 10,000 tons of metal individually packaged inside these racks, which 10,000 tons, that is about 320 million ounces of silver, which would be about 32% of annual world production of silver. Another way to put it in context, right now, COMEX silver reserves, available ones, are relatively low right now. We're talking about 42 million ounces. We can put 320 here. So we can put about 8 times as much silver as currently available in COMEX warehouses.
It's quite a bit. That word efficiency, how you're able to stack it higher, does that also translate into maybe more efficiency as far as savings for people who are looking to store? Because we're going up now instead of out.
Yeah, so essentially, when you build something like this, you have a lot of costs up front in order to finance it. But then you get these big economies of scale because my cost of adding additional storage is becoming minuscule, essentially. And so, and for me, I think our storage cost has always been based as a fixed amount per ounce instead of a percentage. And so my idea was always said, as the price of silver goes up or gold, the cost will stay the same on a dollar basis, which means your percentage becomes smaller and smaller. So right now, if you're looking at gold, let's say we're charging 35 basis points, with gold being around $2,000. If gold goes up to $4,000, it'll become 17 basis points, so 0.17% per year. To put that in context, if you're buying GLD, for example, ETF, through the stock exchange, most people think it's free. It's not free. You're actually paying around 40 basis points per year. And so I think it's reasonable. And, over time, I think we can slowly lower that fee further. If nothing else, by just keeping our fixed costs the same and letting the gold appreciation, the silver appreciation, do all of that.
Right. You know what? One of the questions we had early on, when the building was being built, how are you funding it?
Funding, essentially, 1/3 of it was funded with money I raised. So 1/3 was funded by loans I took, and 1/3 was from retained earnings. We were able to fund this with really not a lot of debt, because our LTV, so our loan to valuation, is somewhere around 30%, which is much lower than you normally have for a building like this, which would be more 70, 80%. And that's sort of in line with the philosophy of not leveraging much. And when you build a building, you do want to leverage somewhat, but I think we found a happy medium, with a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 approach.
Right. You know, when you look around at this massive building right now. What are your thoughts? A bit of relief, a bit of joy, happiness, more work to do?
Uh, This project is ups and downs. Sometimes you have these highs when you go in and you see what it really has become. We had clients coming in and say, look at it, and they say, oh, this is a cathedral, right? That's the impression you get. It's just massive. And it has the style that we were looking for. So it was a lot of work to get here. And then you have the lows when you have a delay and you have other issues, or I'm 2 to 3 days per week on construction. I've basically become a real estate developer accidentally along the way, and you have to go through this. So, but I think now that it's coming to fruition, most of it is it's a satisfaction that we're getting there, but it's also the awareness that as it's finally getting completed, it's becoming a matter of presenting it in the right way. And so that's the next challenge, but we have received very, very good feedback from a lot of different sources, and has a lot of interest in this reserve, and we've really been sort of keeping them on the side because we really want to finish the whole thing, or most of it, before we get most people in to visit and tour and so on. Others had some existing clients. Yeah.
I think the other standout part about this vault is that big, bright, beautiful logo there. I don't think I've ever asked you, what does the logo represent?
So Silver Bullion was always about wealth protection, systemic wealth protection. The type, the saying in the bullion in precious metals oftentimes is, if you don't touch it, you don't own it. And I always took that very much to heart, because there's a lot of truth to that statement. And I wanted to create a system and an option for people where they do truly own it, even if they cannot touch it. So they can come here and touch it, because it does make sense for people, of course, to keep some gold or silver at home. Some people might bury it in the backyard and so on. But at a certain point, especially for bulkier things like silver, it does make sense to take some of that, put it in a different jurisdiction, and keep it there for the long term. And that's really what Silver Bullion was always about. So that logo is sort of representing that, because the house sort of represents your wealth, what you want to protect, your kids, your next generation, whatever is there that is important to you. And the three pieces of the shield around it are representing that protection. And when you look at the precious metal industry, or anybody really safeguarding your wealth, which is physical, you almost always end up dealing with three parties. You might not know that because you're only dealing with one party, which is the dealer, the bank, whoever it is you're dealing with. But that entity normally doesn't store the bullion. That entity is going to also outsource it to a vault, a commercial vault. And then that vault, assuming that they don't outsource it to somebody else, is going to usually rent the vaulting facility from some other entity. So in the best of cases, you have at least three different counterparties that you deal with, even though you're only dealing with one primary one. So one of my goals was that in order to reduce the risk a customer has when he stores with us, is for me to vertically integrate everything, so that I don't have to rely on somebody else. Because if I have to rely on somebody else, I don't really have control. How can I promise my client that everything will be fine if I'm outsourcing to somebody else? Because then I might just end up having this excuse. Oh, sorry, I did everything right, but this guy didn't. Right? As we say in the US, the buck has to stop somewhere, and it has to start and stop with me. So that was always the idea. And not with me, with a company, with Silver Bullion. And so the three parts of the shield represent the three entities you really need when you store, which is the entity providing liquidity, the Silver Bullion, the vault, which is safe house, and the facility where it's all being housed, which is the reserve. And so together, that's what the logo represents.
Right. When it comes to storage, what would be the difference that bullion owners should know when it comes to their storage provider, either renting or actually owning the facility, the vault?
It depends what business you're in. So from the perspective of a vaulting provider, if your business is to move bullion around and to provide storage in different countries, and you need to increase your storage in one location or decrease it at some point, right? Then it makes more sense to rent. And if you don't want to bring your customer to see the place, because it's not going to be very seamless necessarily. Also, if you rent, you cannot necessarily invest a lot in the facility, because you end up investing millions and millions into something, and then the landlord says, well, thank you very much, now I'm going to triple your rent, right? So you don't want that. So you are very limited when it comes to renting, but you also don't have to deploy a lot of resources. Most vaults will operate this way. They don't see the point of risking capital by investing it like this. Our business model is different. We are not in the business of moving bullion around. We are not in the business of being in different countries. We are in the business of safeguarding gold and silver for the long term, for the next generation. And because of that, it makes a lot of sense for us to dig our roots deeper. Invest in having a facility like this, and uh, do something extraordinary with it. And that's a luxury which I think almost nobody in the industry has, because it does not seem like a safe way to go. What we're doing is innovating based on a belief that people do want to store their wealth using physical metals in a safe jurisdiction for the long term, because the world is becoming a more and more uncertain world. And so this approach it's very rare that companies have the money and the funds and the willingness to invest like this. So for us, we've always been a mission-driven company first, and profits has always been sort of a secondary thing from investing and making our products better and building trust with the client. And so that's a natural extension to whatever it is. But I do believe it is quite unique in the industry.
Right. You mentioned that word trust, and I believe there was a report from the World Gold Council. They had stated something along the lines where one of the reasons that people may not want to invest in precious metals, gold or silver, is because of a lack of transparency, which translates into a lack of trust. What are you doing to extinguish these issues, to bring in that trust?
Well, for me, it's nothing new. When we started Silver Bullion, my our first mission really was to provide some silver liquidity to Singapore, because at the time we started it in 2009, there literally was nobody buying silver bullion in Singapore, which is why we were called Silver Bullion originally. And once that started working, the next step was to provide systemic wealth protection. How can I secure my clients' physical gold and silver? And in order to do that, you need to build trust with somebody. And so the question is, how do you get a small little company back then of maybe 5 or 6 people to get somebody on the other side of the world to send maybe a portion of the life savings over for you to store when you're starting off? So trust was essentially the key for Silver Bullion, and it's what we always need to build and build and build. So this report just reconfirmed it. And the way we did this is by starting with the insurance company back then, because I can't ask people to trust me, right? But if I can convince Lloyd's of London that I'm good risk, and not just for the standard insurance, which was theft and infidelity, but also mysterious disappearance, which was quite hard to get, then I can go back to clients and say, yes, we are small, yes, we are new, but we have all these different transparency systems. And by the way, Lloyd's of London is guaranteeing all of this. So that's how we started building the trust. But I think when it comes down to the public, there has been so many setups which have been a little bit less than honest about the way they're being run. It is very common in the industry that people believe there's physical gold when there is no physical gold. It is very common in the industry that the gold is not owned by a client, but it is on the balance sheet of the company and owed to the client. So the difference here is important, because if it's being owed to somebody, that essentially is capital which the company can use to do something with it. Now, when we built this vault, none of our clients' gold was ever used, nor could we, because all of our gold and silver is sold by serial number or by parcel ID to the client with a Singapore invoice. We are just an agent who stores it for them. And in Singapore, falsifying such an invoice is a criminal penalty. So you're going to jail. So from the beginning, my plan was to build a system which will protect the clients from us. Once I can establish that through transparency, through only having an ownership-based system with an invoice, with photos and other things, with audits, with the insurance, Then I was able to slowly build trust. The next question became, how do you know it's real? And that's really where our research in testing came in, with density, ultrasound, X-ray spectrography, magnetism, electric conductivity testing. And eventually, we got very confident in it, and we started guaranteeing also gold, because we were able to make sure that the gold is genuine. And as we grew larger and we had $40 million in inventory, we could use our own company inventory to guarantee that promise. Right? So it's been 15 years of improving how we can reduce the counterparty risk the client has with us. How can we make it more transparent? What concern does the client have which we haven't been able to address yet? Or how can we address it? And so I love to talk with clients which are critical, because sometimes I can learn something or I can get ideas on how to improve things. And it's been a continuous process like that for 15 years. And that's how we ended up here.
Right. And I think that's it's great to always be open to what people have to say and create fresh and new ideas. You said two things that kind of stuck out. You said the words small and you said the words other side of the world. So within that context, how did what might be the world's largest silver vault end up in tiny Singapore?
Well, Singapore is, I believe, the best jurisdiction to store gold and silver. Maybe along with Switzerland. I think Switzerland and Singapore maybe are the two entities that nowadays make sense to store gold and silver in long term. And in case of Singapore, there's three basic reasons behind it. The first one is Singapore is a very wealthy state. Um, Singapore has no net debt. If you look at the gross debt statistics, you will find that Singapore has gross debt, but those are essentially transfers from the pension systems to the sovereign wealth funds. So if you add the sovereign wealth funds with the pension systems, you'll find that Singapore is over 100% assets to GDP. So because they're rich, they don't really have a reason to nationalize gold, which is one of the worries, which I think we increasingly have in many countries of the world. Because if you have a currency crisis because you created too much debt, then there's always a possibility that you might be facing a nationalization event again. And that's one of the key things that you have to sort of preempt. And so Singapore is very wealthy, doesn't need to do that. Secondly, Singapore built all of that wealth by essentially being a place that people trust, confidence. There was a report, for example, that Singapore now has about 4,300 foreign multinational HQs. The numbers are staggering. I mean, if you look at the amount of direct investment by foreign countries, you will find that Singapore, even though it's a tiny country, has larger direct investments than, I believe, Vietnam and Thailand combined. Something like 22% of all semiconductor manufacturing equipment is coming out of Singapore. 10% of wafers is coming out of Singapore. It's one of the largest ports. 1.5 million barrels of oil are being refined in Singapore. Saudi Arabia refines 3 million barrels a day. So half of Saudi Arabia's capacity in refining is coming out of tiny Singapore. People don't know these things, but Singapore really is very important internationally because so much money is flowing in. Why is so much money flowing in? Because Singapore is the freest economy worldwide, according to the Fraser Institute. Taxes are low. There's almost no corruption. You can trust the judicial system. And if you have intellectual property, if you have a government where you need to make sure that things work and which is not going to play some funny trick on you tomorrow, you come to Singapore. And so all these HQ, all these major investments are coming here. If you have a semiconductor fab and you can hire stuff at half the price in Vietnam, but you don't know if the electricity will be here next week, right? You would never invest there. Singapore electrical grid is built with so many redundancies because they wanted to make sure that it's ideal for semiconductor fabs. So Singapore didn't become like this by chance. It became like this because of very careful, pragmatic planning. But the underlying feature of Singapore is confidence. And Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore long term, which built modern Singapore, summed it up as confidence. So if Singapore were ever to nationalize gold, they would lose the very things that made Singapore powerful and wealthy, which is trust. So Singapore will be probably the last country in the world to want to do something like this. And lastly, Singapore is very well defended militarily. Even though it's such a small place, it has an army of about 70, 80,000 active personnel and 420,000 draftees at ready call. A military budget that's 3.5 times that of Malaysia's the next biggest neighbor. Indonesia, military budget larger than Indonesia. So regionally, Singapore with the years is not just become a place that can defend itself, it's actually a place which has become one of the larger military forces in the region. It's considered a medium-sized military, even though it's a city-state. With most assets being in other countries, Australia, Thailand, United States, especially Singapore Air Force. So it's not a place, like Monaco, where if you have a neighbor who's so inclined can just sort of take it over overnight. If Singapore thinks they're being attacked, they're just going to invade Malaysia and take over Malaysia, essentially. So you put these three things together, and you will find that Singapore is a solid place. And just like Switzerland, it's always neutral. And it's not just neutral, but it's economically relevant to all of these parties. And because of these reasons, if we are going to have geopolitical tensions which are worsening, if we have trade wars becoming worse, we have financial wars, currency crisis, and so on, Singapore is going to remain open to business, and it's going to remain welcoming, to all major economies, essentially.
Just to share with people right now, you may hear some construction going on in the background. You may hear some fans. It's a little bit hot here. You might even hear some airplanes flying by, and that there's a story behind it, especially when Gregor is talking about security and defense of Singapore, because there was a day you had one of the guys fly a drone, and there were some things that then followed.
Well, when you're building a vault, especially a large vault like this, and people start thinking about Mission Impossible. And of course, people will say, well, how are you going to make sure that there are not going to be 2 Black Hawks helicopters coming, letting troops out on the roof, and then they're going to rappel down this room and start stealing the 32-kilo silver bars by somehow getting some backup there. And well, the facility is quite close to the Changi Airport, and Changi Airport is one of the most closely surveilled airspaces in the world. So the government doesn't want any drones flying around. And so, well, we assume that means outside, but as you can see the size of this room, we had a drone flying in here taking footage. And literally 6 minutes later or so, we had Ito's auxiliary police at our front door saying they detected a drone flight. And 2 minutes later, we have actual Singapore police coming in as well, wanting to see the drone, wanting to see what happened, and they open an investigation. And really all we did is fly this drone inside this room. We had to show them the footage that it didn't go outside the building, anywhere close to where any plane can be. But it, in a sense, the case was dropped, obviously. But it just showed how having a drone anywhere in the vicinity will cause such sort of reaction. And so we don't have to worry about Black Hawk helicopters, landing anywhere on the roof because they wouldn't be coming anywhere close to this area.
Again, and I can assure you, I will not be one to be rappelling down from the roof of the facility. But I just want to get back to when you mentioned the insurance, because that's extremely important. Mysterious disappearance. Could you define that a little bit more?
Yeah, so when it comes to insurance, I became aware of all of this because when we started off, as you said, we started off outsourcing to another vault operator. And as you read the contract, you will find all of these exclusions. And one of the exclusions stated that if your gold mysteriously disappears, then the vault operator is not liable. I was saying that it's ridiculous. I'm giving you my gold for safekeeping, and you're gonna tell me it mysteriously disappears, so I'm not liable to pay you anything, right? So, and of course, that got me sort of on a mission to figure out a way to get mysterious disappearance coverage, which was impossible to get because I need to build my own vault to get my own coverage to be able to do it, which is why we built the vault. But as I went along with this, the question became, why is there such an exception? And the way to explain it is, if you look at it from a vault operator point of view, if somebody comes in and steals a gold bar or some other content, then as a vault provider operator, you would have to make a police report. The police will come, a police report will be created. That police report will then be sent as evidence to the insurance company, and the insurance company will pay using that independent police report as evidence. If you have a case of infidelity where you have somebody inside the company steal some gold in some way, then it will be the same thing. It will have to go through a police investigation. The police investigation would have a result that will be sent to the insurance company, and the insurance company will make a payment based on that police report. But by definition, if you have a mysterious disappearance, then there's no police report because let's say you are doing your inventory, and instead of having 100 bars of gold, you only have 99. And you don't have any way, you don't know how it happened. So maybe there was a shipment coming in of 10 bars 3 months ago, and you didn't count them correctly. And there are really only 9 bars, but somebody put it in the system as 10 bars, right? So it might not have been somebody stealing. It might have been a mistake somewhere along the line. We don't know. That's what makes it mysterious. So what happens in that case? Well, if I go to the insurance company and I tell the insurance company, I thought I had 100 bars, but I only have 99. Please give me some money for that extra bar. Is the insurance company going to pay or no? Well, it depends. If mysterious disappearance is covered, then they will pay, assuming there's not a clear fraud case, but they are supposed to pay. And so that's a lot of risk for the insurance company to take on. So not everybody is going to get this kind of insurance, and the premium that the insurance company will ask to give that insurance, will naturally be commensurate with the risk assessments that they have. And how does our insurance company evaluates that risk? Well, they send a species inspector. A species inspector is, I would say, the ultimate authority in security, because they are the ones which would evaluate whether the insurance ought to be given to you and what kind of insurance, and make a recommendation which allows the insurance company to set your rate. And so for us, because of the system and the process we built, we always ended up having the highest recommendation, which then allowed us to get mysterious disappearance. And that was one of the key things which allowed me to build the trust to then grow the gold and silver we're storing for clients, and eventually get to build the reserve.
Okay, so here we are. This is probably the only interview that we'll have while the vault is empty, but maybe one more interview with a surprise guest.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. You can play basketball.
But what's next? What is going to happen next in the facility here?
So by next week, we will have the racks coming in. We will have about, I believe, 8 containers of racking material coming. And the installation will start probably on Wednesday next week. The racks will go about 12 meters. That's close to 40 feet high. We will then have various sensors that are being installed, some additional lights, working lights and so on, that are coming in. And by late March, early April, I hope that we will conclude that. And by that time, we'll then be very close to start moving silver into the vault.
Okay. And with the rest of the facility, the reserve, the building itself, when do you expect to be able to have people actually come in and visit and see the facility in all its glory? Because it is a pretty glorious thing.
Yeah, so for us, the most of the facility is ready when it comes to TOP standard, meaning to get the permit to move in permanently. But there's still some construction going on, which means there is dust. And if there's dust, we don't want to turn on the aircon systems, because that can sort of damage the aircon systems, so we don't want to do that. And if we don't have the aircon systems, because we're in Singapore, it's quite hot. So we don't want to open clients over until the aircon systems are done. So getting that TOP permit and so on depends a little bit on governmental inspectors. But my current expectations is that we'll be able to get everything approved by late April at this point. By which point this vault will also be operational. This room as well.
Okay. Let me test Gregor's math here. How many 1,000-ounce LBMA bars could fit in the vault here?
1,000 LBMA bars. Well, we have 320 million ounces capacity here. Each bar is on average 1,000 ounces. So if you remove 3 zeros, you end up with 320,000 bars.
And I think, one more thing, a lot of times with people who are storing, there's always that question of liquidity. So especially when they're storing, these 1,000-ounce bars, and quite a few sometimes, is liquidity something to be concerned about?
Not really, not for gold and silver bullion, because there's always a market for physical silver and gold when it's of the right kind. LBMA bars, investment grade bars, the Royal Canadian Mint, or any LBMA refiner really. These bars you can sell within 24 hours or so to another entity, but you can lock in the price right away. So in that sense, no, when it comes to selling, that shouldn't be a problem. When it comes to buying, it depends on the market conditions. So interestingly enough, last year, a lot of investors in physical precious metals say we're more on the selling side. So right now, most dealers actually tend to have extra inventory anyway, which means on the buying side, things are quite fine. But if you're going to have another Silicon Valley bank episode or something worse, then the liquidity problem might be more on the buying side, that it's not always so easy or so quick that you can find physical bullion in an environment like that.
So one more question here. If let's say I'm storing, let's say 1,000 ounces of silver with you, does my silver just kind of sit in this vault and just kind of stay here, or does it is it able to do different things within the vertical integration that you talked about?
Well, the bullion will always be here. By design, we cannot encumber it ourselves, and it cannot be moved anywhere, and it's being audited by third-party entities. And you can come in and you can do a custom audit with like 1 or 2 days notice as well to make sure the bullion is here. So we're going through a lot of lengths to make sure that your bullion is here and remains here. But as you're the owner of that bullion, we did create the peer-to-peer lending system, which allows you to take that bar of silver, so let's say it's 25,000 US dollars, and take a loan of say 15,000 US dollars against that bar, using that bar as collateral. And that loan doesn't come from us, it's come from another client. And we act as an escrow and a custodian in between, whereby the money essentially is deposited with us by the other client, and we are forwarding it to you when you take on that loan, with the interest rate being set between you and the client using a bid and ask system, which you can find on our website on Silver Bullion. You don't have it on account, you can see it live essentially. And once you have an account, you can make a loan like that in as little as 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. It's what people are looking for, where they want to make sure that their bullion is always here. They want to perhaps come by and visit and see that it's here. They want to be able to track it in some ways. And I think different products that Silver Bullion has, such as the peer-to-peer program, enables them to keep their investment on investment.
The peer-to-peer system has been very successful for us. We started it in 2015, so it's been 9 years now running. In US dollar terms, we had over $500 million worth of loans that have been made, so over $500 million. If I remember correctly, about 16,000 loans. Some loans can be as low as $3,000. Some might be $800,000. And in all of these cases, we never had a default. And we never had a default because A, we have so much collateral. B, if the value of the gold or silver were to crash down to 110%, we liquidate the bullion. But because we have a lot of buffer, that also really hasn't been happening. So it's a way for you, if you're a borrower, to get access to funds. It can be good from a tax perspective, because if you happen to be from a country or subject to some sort of capital gain tax, then instead of selling the gold or silver, you can just take a loan. So you don't need to take the capital gain hit, for example. And if you do take an interest, you can probably deduct it from your taxes. If you are in a jurisdiction where you're paying, say, 7-8% to borrow money, well, you're better off getting it with us, because the average rate has been around 4% throughout the lifetime of the system. Lately, with the interest rate being higher, it's been more around 5.5% or so. But 5.5% in today's environment is still a pretty good rate when it comes to borrowing money. And again, the rate comes from the lending side. If you're a lender and you have the option of lending said money, get interest, and it's a very safe sort of income, because it's collateralized with, say, 200% worth of silver, or 160% worth of gold, which is fully insured, it's liquid, and we are making sure that if the value of gold or silver ever to crash to 110%, it's being liquidated. And if anything goes wrong, we have a sweeper fund, which essentially is some of my own money, which is there to take the hit first. And because of these safeguards, we've never had default, with a default being defined that a lender has never not gotten their money back on time. And so it's very unusual, especially when you hear peer-to-peer. Normally it's very risky, but that's why you call it secured peer-to-peer.
And with that, Gregor, I'd like to thank you for your time. I was looking forward to see how the rest of the reserve unfolds, and we are definitely looking forward to seeing this room stacked with silver.
Yes, that'll be the next step.
All right, thank you, Gregor.
That was Gregor Gregersen giving us insights on the vault and the building of the reserve. To get more information and updates, go to thereserve.sg. If you like this video, please do subscribe, share, and give us a thumbs up. All are greatly appreciated. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.